The Sony Xperia 1 Mark III is the world's first smartphone to pair a 4K HDR OLED display with a 120Hz refresh rate, which is possible thanks to a dedicated X1 display chipset. It is also the first to make use of a variable telephoto lens, a dual phase detection sensor, and of course the first to embed a 360-degree reality audio experience through its front-facing stereo speakers. Now, while all that sounds insanely impressive, it certainly increased the premium price up even more. With all that said, it's time to deep dive into my extremely detailed full review of the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. I have the frosted grey color variants of the device. You can also pick it up in frosted black or frosted purple, though if you want the grey variant, it only comes in the 256GB version of the phone. So if you opt for the 512GB version, you're not going to be able to get the grey in your hands. We have Gorilla Glass Victus on the front and Gorilla Glass 6 on the back, with an aluminum frame sandwiching them together, and the back is a matte finish, though there are a slight tad of fingerprint smudges that are apparent. So you can purchase this stand cover case, which looks fantastic. I actually got it for free when I purchased the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. It does have a kicker at the back, which makes it pretty simple and easy to use when watching movies or playing games in that wonderful 21:9 aspect ratio display mode. Of course, the back looks absolutely phenomenal, and underneath the hood, we have a 4500 mAh battery, which has increased, as well as the increased 30-watt PDY charging, which comes in the box, wireless charging as well, IP68 certification, and of course 5G. On the right hand side, we have a volume rocker, as well as a power button that doubles up as a fingerprint sensor, a voice assistant button, which is something new, and the old school shutter button we've seen on Sony Xperia devices. Also have a dual SIM 5G tray, which can also support microSD expansion, as well as a 3.1 USB Type-C port, and two microphones, one at the bottom, one at the top, and a 3.5mm high-res audio jack, as well as dual stereo speakers, which support 360-degree audio, Dolby Atmos, and DSEE. The camera bump is pretty minimal and pretty similar to other flagships around, though the very photo-enhanced devices have a much larger camera module, meaning that the Xperia 1 Mark III doesn't make much of a surface wobble when on a flat surface, that is. When it comes to the designs, I actually did a poll on my channel. Most people absolutely adore the Xperia 1 Mark III's design, and I have to admit it is so darn clean, but it looks so similar to its predecessor. It is a lot lighter than other smartphones around, but it is a lot narrower with the banana shape that has come across from generation to generation, from the Mark I to the Mark II to the Mark III, though it's lighter, and honestly it's not that much taller than others, but it is a hell of a lot narrower, making it easy to grip. The back looks gorgeous, like we've mentioned so many times, but what about the front? Well, we are welcomed to a 6.5-inch 21:9 cinema wide display. It is 4K HDR OLED, 120Hz refresh rate, 240Hz touch sampling rate, 240Hz motion blur reduction, and of course powering all of this is the wonderful X1 mobile display chipset. Comparing it to other devices around, the 1 billion colors does make a difference. It is the smallest screen out of the bunch over here because of the top and bottom bezel that you see there. Some people actually still prefer this, weirdly enough. I have asked a couple people. A lot of people aren't the biggest fans of the punch hole notch. Nevertheless, 1300 nits is the unofficial statement of the brightness of the Xperia 1 Mark III, which actually puts it on par with many other flagship devices around. And testing it in my studio over here, it's actually brighter with auto brightness off compared to the S21 Ultra, which is a good thing. And taking it outside, wondering what that could do on automatic brightness, because it can get high with peak. Using a Lux, you need to times it by 10 to get to the nits of brightness, and we're getting well over 1300 nits of brightness outdoors, which is a huge step up for Sony, especially for people that have used the predecessors. When it comes to screen to body ratio, of course, it's not as impressive as other devices around due to the bezel at the top and the bottom. Let me know what you guys think of this old school design in terms of the screen. I don't know, it doesn't really bother me too much, since we have a 4K display over here with a 120Hz refresh rate, meaning that it's finally matching the refresh rates of the 4 devices on the left and outdoing the Apple iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is still stuck to 60 Hz. Hopefully that changes near the end of the year. It is just as smooth as all other devices here, the Xperia 1 Mark III, that is, not the iPhone, and it looks even better thanks to it being 4K with extra clarity, though I'm not too sure how many pixels you can actually see on such a tiny screen. 4K is enabled using the creator mode, and while we usually could disable the motion blur reduction, there is no option for it. It's just 240 Hz motion blur reduction all the time. The creator mode looks slightly dimmer than the standard mode, but it does pop out the colors and make it look pretty nice, meaning that you can actually auto create the creator mode within individual apps instead of having it on all the time, which is great. We also use the X1 chipset for mobile based on Bravia TV over here to enhance video as well, which is great. And taking a screenshot when in an app that is utilizing 120 Hz and the 4K, you could see that it is at 4K and 120 FPS after taking these screenshots. Same thing with AnTuTu, and the same thing with YouTube, though YouTube is capped at 60 FPS. When you do decide to pinch to zoom on YouTube, you lose a lot of the video because of the strange 21:9 aspect ratio display, but we can adjust quite a bit. I'm talking white balance, of course, over here, and we do have dark mode too, though when you do decide to enable dark mode, it's not truly dark. It's kind of gray with some things being very black. Most of the time it just looks washed out in all apps, which is not a big deal breaker. I kind of think it looks snazzy, but it's not going to save your battery as much as if it were to paint all the LEDs completely black. Of course, we also have an always on display, though not too many options and you can't really customize it that much. It is nice and bright, a lot brighter than other ones around, though it is going to chomp some of your battery. Thankfully, it has increased to 4,500 milliamps. We do have a physical fingerprint sensor this time around, the same as the Xperia 1 Mark II of last year, though it is improved quite a bit. It is a lot faster in that. I can't say it's faster than other flagships using an in-display fingerprint sensor, or even the iPhone 12 Pro Max's 3D Face ID, since it lacks a fingerprint sensor, but it is a hell of a lot quicker compared to last year. And unfortunately, there is still no option for face unlock. That is probably because when you touch the power button, it just uses the fingerprint sensor anyway. With the selfie cam, we have a 24mm lens over here. It is unfortunately only 8 megapixels. Photos come out pretty clear, but as soon as you go into half or even full bokeh, the edge detection is horrendous. And when enabling every single mode that you can use within the portrait option of the camera user interface, you kind of land up looking like a bit of a Barbie doll. What's up guys, this is Technic recording a 1080p at 30 FPS video using the brand new Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. Yes, it is a flagship, and yes, it cost a hell of a lot of money, but no, the selfie cam cannot exceed 1080p or 30 frames per second. There is also a feature that you can use across the board with all cameras, including the selfie and all of the back cams as well, which is called wind filter, intelligent wind filter. Right now it's currently off. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on right now. And now intelligent wind filter has been enabled. Let me know if you guys can hear a difference. There's not too much wind. It's a nice sunny day here in Shanghai. Nevertheless, let me know if you guys can actually tell the difference. Recording video at night using the selfie cam is not really a go-to for any device, so just as other competitors around, doesn't look too fresh. Taking a pic using the selfie cam at night doesn't look terrible. There's no night mode option, but turning the flash on makes it look great. The biggest selling point of this phone is arguably the display, but also the cameras, of course. And this time around, we get welcomed by a similar 12 megapixel trio of cameras compared to the predecessor, though the telephoto is now variable that can adjust between 70 to 105 millimeters lens in focal length, that is. This time around, we also have a 3D ITOF lens, and of course we have Zeiss optics to cover them all up. Before we jump into the actual photo samples, it's worth jumping into the camera user interface. We have basic mode over here, which is pretty much a common user interface that you'd see on many other devices. You have your zoom functions. You can switch, well, we also have AI zoom, resolution zoom over here. That's something new for all phones, but you can change the bokeh over here. And unlike other phones, you can change your continuous shooting or single shot shooting to high or low or just a single shot. And unlike other phones, you can do it at 20 frames per second. And unlike other phones, you have a two-phase shutter button. But otherwise, the camera UI in the basic settings mode is pretty common compared to others. But the thing that changes is when you flick from basic to auto or go to program auto or any other camera mode that you've come to know and love within DSLRs, that is very different on this phone compared to any other phone around. This is a fully fledged DSLR software within the Xperia 1 Mark III, which has been inspired by Sony's own alpha team. And yes, there are a ton of things you can tweak. Pretty much everything you can tweak within a DSLR camera, you can tweak here. And focusing is not too shabby. I wouldn't say it's on par with Sony's alpha cameras, but the ultra wide cam looks great with regular. Look, I'm not a pro photographer over here, so whenever I show the pro app that I'm using and I'm adjusting my own ISO and shutter speed, so on and so forth, I'm not going to do as good of a job as a pro would, but I can say that the optical zoom looks fantastic as well as the main cameras, even when using the basic mode. 4.4 times optical zoom looks great even on the pro, and 12.5 times you can enable the AI zoom. It makes a world of a difference. Moving to the pro mode, I kind of got my white balance off a bit there as well as my exposure, but I'll get used to it. You know, it's actually kind of exciting to be able to use something so small on the go all the time, and you can also take raw pics, but unfortunately, my phone heated up within the first 20 minutes of taking these incredible photos, which kind of sucks. Of course, we can use the 20 FPS shutter button to get a crazy amount of snaps in a short amount of time using burst, and it looked pretty great, though it wasn't the clearest. And there is a macro mode which only automatically turns on, though it doesn't look the best. There is no bokeh in this shot of buzz. I put on half bokeh over here using the basic camera app, and going into the pro mode using background blur and foreground blur, you can really start to have some fun with it. Now, comparing it to the S21 Ultra just with a regular snap, these are all regular snaps over here with the S21 Ultra binned down to 12 megapixel using the same resolution as the Xperia 1 Mark III, but of course it is binned down to Form 1 Super Pixel. You can see quite a lot. It's a lot brighter on the Samsung, but sometimes there's just a tad more detail on the Xperia, which is not what I was expecting over here, though it is slightly different when we start zooming in. Of course, we have a larger focal length when it comes to the ultra wide, meaning that we're getting a higher field of view, which is a plus toward the S21 Ultra. And of course, we can zoom in even more with a periscope optical zoom of 10x on the Samsung and a max digital zoom of 100x, which just completely outdoes the Xperia 1 Mark III's 12.5x and looks a lot better even at 10x. When it comes to night mode, both of them are using automatic AI night modes over here. There is only an automatic feature within the Xperia. You cannot just adjust it yourself unless you go into pro mode and you change the exposure rates. But taking the pictures compared to the S21 Ultra, of course the S21 Ultra looks better, but it makes it look like daytime, whereas the Xperia makes it look as it is in reality using the pro mode. Once again, I am not a professional photographer over here. It was kind of tough for me. It took me a hell of a long time to get these shots right without them blurring out. It is going to be hard if you do decide to purchase yourself an Xperia 1 Mark III and you are not a professional photographer already. But when you do get the right shot, it is just so darn satisfying. And someone asked me for a long exposure shot with a low ISO and shutter speed, and there it is. Let me know what you guys think. Now, when it comes to video recording within the basic app, we can use HDR, but only at 30 FPS modes. And there is no 4K 60 FPS with a regular 16:9 aspect ratio within the main app. And when you go into the Cinema Pro app, you can do 4K at 60 FPS, but only at an aspect ratio of 21:9, meaning you're first of all not getting full 4K, but you also can't record 4K 60 FPS with a regular 16:9 aspect ratio, and you have to create a complete project for it, meaning if you just want a quick 4K 60 FPS clip of, say, your kid running through the garden, you're not going to be able to do it nice and snappy like you've come to do on most phones. Now, we do have 1080p at 60 FPS on the regular basic app, which looks pretty good. So you can take a video of your kid like that, I guess, for 4K 30 FPS, main over here using the basic photo app. And you can also shoot 4K 24 FPS using HDR10, which looks phenomenal. It looks like a movie. I mean, this looks pretty great, guys. You have to admit. Now, comparing video to the S21 Ultra, of course, the S21 Ultra can do 16:9 at 4K 60 FPS, but since the Xperia is limited to 30, I'm just comparing it like this so that you can compare detail and not FPS. I think they are pretty much on par. Sometimes the Sony camera actually looks more movie-like than that of the S21 Ultra. If that is an aesthetic you guys are into, gives it a bit of a darker tinge. Now, we do have a movie-like option that is Cinema 4K using the Cinema Pro application over here, and it looks phenomenal. Of course, you have to adjust the ISO and the shutter speed and all that jazz by yourself. Once again, I'm not a pro videographer or photographer, that is, so it's really tough for me, but I can't say I didn't have fun because I had oodles of fun. 4K 30 FPS using ultra wide in the photo app, 4K 30 FPS is limited on the ultra wide cam, even within the Cinema Pro app over here. And we do have Venice CS, which many of you have come to know and love, professional photographers and videographers, that is, gives it kind of an old school thriller tinge over here to your video, which is pretty much all rights reserved to DSLRs. It's really cool to see it on a phone over here. Of course, we did see it last year as well. And when it comes to stabilization, turning stabilization off within settings, you can see it's very janky and wobbly. Enabling stabilization, it's night and day compared to when it was off, and stabilization on with the ultra wide cam kind of gives it like a GoPro feel. I am running quite fast. I was pretty scared of falling over here. Nevertheless, moving on from that, we do have slow motion 720p at 120 FPS using the basic app, though we can record cinema 4K with a strange 21:9 resolution at 4K 120 FPS, which is great, but it would have been awesome to see slow-mo 4K 120 FPS within the regular app for people that aren't so nerdy when it comes to professional photography. And when it comes to recording night video, once again, a lot brighter on the S21 Ultra, but the S21 Ultra blows out all the lights and tries to make it look like daytime when it's not. I actually prefer the footage on the Xperia 1 Mark III as opposed to the S21 Ultra when it comes to night videographer, since the Xperia 1 Mark III actually handles all the lights a hell of a lot better. Even though the scene is not completely brightened up, it does capture what I'm actually seeing and not what my brain truly wants to see, which is what the S21 Ultra is trying to give you. Cameras all well and great, and that was a huge chunk of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But of course, if you want to use your camera phone, you're gonna have to charge it up. Of course, we have 30-watt wide charging, and they haven't announced how fast the wireless charging is. Last year's was 11 watt. I'm assuming it's the same over here. We can now do reverse wireless charging, which is great, but because the wireless charging is probably only 11 watts, reverse is probably only 5 watts, which kind of sucks. And we do have reverse USB power share, which is great, charging another phone using a wide cable. We also have battery care over here, which allows you to cap your battery capacity to 90%, so it doesn't degrade your battery over time, or just charge up the last 10% just before you decide to wake up. And of course, once your phone is all charged up, you are welcome to Android 11. There is no heavy skin over this. It's pretty much stock software, with Google integrated on the left and in the middle and through the Play Store, and with a quick search box at the bottom, which is great even on the Chinese variant of the phone, which I have here. Once you throw Google on this phone, it becomes a global Google-fied device, though when you remove the search bar at the bottom, you have to manually rearrange all your icons, which is pretty time consuming for a reviewer such as myself. Going into the Play Store works as it would, and using Google Assistant actually works, even with the integrated Google Assistant AI button, which is fantastic. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, good on you. We also have a bar on the side called Side Sense. Of course, you can disable it, but you can use this to quickly jump into apps or jump into multitasking. And thanks to the long and lanky display over here of 21:9 aspect ratio, yes, it is possible to watch a video at the top and play a game at the same time, which is what I'm doing right now with my previous video. I hope that you guys did check that one out. Of course, this is the 2.0 to that baby. And yes, we can do a pop-out window of a video or any other app that is. Within settings, you can adjust that too. And there is one-handed operation mode over here, though it doesn't actually work with full screen navigation gestures, so you have to use Side Sense. If you do want to use it on the go, you're going to have to switch to the 3-button layout in terms of navigation and getting around your phone. You just double tap the home button, but I do prefer full screen navigation gestures, and you can indeed adjust the sensitivity of pulling from the left or right to go back. But when you have full screen navigation gestures enabled, most games crop in the screen because of the aspect ratio of the phone. But the strange thing is, it's not the game, it's actually the phone software, which is something that I complained about last year. They still haven't fixed. It does work when you use the 3-button navigation instead of the full screen gestures. This really needs to get fixed. But fortunately, the haptic feedback is absolutely fantastic. And not only using it as day-to-day use, we also have something called dynamic vibration, which has also been brought forward from last year. And yes, it vibrates your hands with every little bit of noise. Is finally here, and being that it has first released in China, I've managed to get my hands on it quite early. That being said, the prices in the top right corner of the screen reflect the current Chinese price. Of course, talking about audio, we do have Dolby Atmos, which is what we've also seen on many flagship phones these days, but changing things up is the 360 spatial sound coming through either the front-facing speakers or optimized through any headset you plug into them using obviously 360-degree audio system software. Now the speakers are said to be 40% louder compared to the Xperia 1 Mark II, but how do they compare against two of the most impressive sounding smartphones around?
Hostile predator missile inbound.
Веду огонь на подавление!
Eat that.
Now, of course, when it comes to gaming, we do have Game Enhancer, which we've seen on Sony devices before, where you can add games to it, and then you can have an on-screen overlay when you're playing the game to do things such as screen record. This time around, you can actually screen record at 120 FPS, though you're limited to 720p when you do decide to do that. We do have HS power control, which I'll show you in a sec, and it actually gives you an option for a 240 screen refresh rate, though it actually puts black slides in, kind of frame skips. So it's actually 120 FPS, not 240 FPS. Don't get confused with that. We also have an audio equalizer. We can adjust the display's colors, of course. And once we're in the game, we can take screenshots and we can take recordings using that 120 FPS mode, which is awesome. We also have the options that I just showed you at a glance that you can quickly jump into, which is great, and you can put some sensitive optimized touching areas over there. Most impressive thing here is the HS power control. When you plug in your charging cable, it doesn't use the battery, it just uses the power outlets. But when you do pop in your 3.5mm audio device and you have HS power control plugged in as well, it's kind of a little bit uncomfortable. You can pop out any app of your choice when playing a game, which is great. You can also block everything out, and you can change your picture mode to gaming, which makes it look more realistic but less vivid. And you also have an audio equalizer too, which is of course great as well. And keeping the brightness maxed out is not a good thing, since it limits the features. It just popped up saying that because the phone overheated and got to almost 70 degrees in Celsius, and I didn't even play the game. It was just 5 minutes of me showcasing the game enhanced features when inside of a game. Talking about Genshin Impact over here, which is the reason the phone overheated so much, we're only getting between 48 and 60 FPS on max graphics over here. The game is capped at 60 FPS, so it's no surprise. Just most phones with Snapdragon 888 chipsets can do a solid 60 most of the time, so it's kind of a bummer. And the PS5 controller is still not supported for the Xperia 1 Mark III. It just kind of flies you around the place, and the stick drift is a real problem even when jumping onto a phone using the new DualSense controller from the PS5. But you can still use an Xbox controller, which is ironic but doable. Call of Duty Mobile over here, very high graphics. The max FPS here is 60. Unfortunately, it can go to 90, but only on medium graphics. We don't have that option yet. I'm pretty sure it will get included in the future. And moving on to PUBG Mobile, HDR graphics with extreme FPS here, which is 60. Once again, the game can go up to 90 FPS, but there is no support for the Xperia 1 Mark III as of yet. I'm pretty sure it will get support relatively soon, but a solid 60 FPS is definitely welcome. And now we actually can make use of the Ultra HD mode within PUBG Mobile, because we have an Ultra HD display over here, though it is capped at 40 FPS. Of course, we're not utilizing the 120 FPS. It still looks absolutely stunning. Now moving on to Dead Trigger 2, which usually doesn't have an FPS cap at all. We're capping at 60 over here, which kind of sucks. Once again, an issue with the game, not necessarily an issue with the phone. I'm pretty sure this will get fixed in the future. We are, of course, getting a solid 60 FPS. Max graphics in Bullet Force, max FPS over here. We're sitting at pretty much a solid 120 FPS, fluctuating between 110 and 121. It feels good. It looks fantastic. I just can't get over this display. And of course, you're not going to have any distractions in terms of touching the edges of your device, thanks to the added little borders over there, which are, some will like, some will not really enjoy the aesthetic of the display. And of course, Real Racing 3 going all the way up to 120 FPS as well, pretty solid over there. But what about benchmarks? Well, of course, we have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, we have UFS 3.1 storage, and we have that wonderfully powered Snapdragon 888 chipset, which is powering the whole device, and a huge 4,500 mAh battery, which has increased from the 4,000 mAh battery of last year, which is good to see. We're using Game Enhancer here and performance mode to jump through AnTuTu, Geekbench, and 3D Mark Wildlife, and after doing all of those, testing out the battery percentage drain, it drained by 7% at a rate of 21 mAh per minute, and the temperature jumped up by 15.7 degrees in Celsius, so it was better than the average Snapdragon 888 chipset powered smartphones on my channel in terms of milliampere per minute drain, as well as temperature gained. But the phone did certainly throttle, and that is why the screen is dim, even though I have the brightness maxed out. Nevertheless, talking about AnTuTu over here, we got a score of 818,000, which puts it second on the list of Snapdragon 888 chipsets devices filmed in this video. And moving on to Geekbench version 5, we got a score of 1124 for single core and 3291 for multi-core, which puts it pretty similar to all other Snapdragon 888 chipset smartphones around, as well as 3D Mark Wildlife, which got an FPS of 33.2, which is slightly above the S21 Ultra and slightly below the other Snapdragon 888 powered devices. The Sony Xperia 1 Mark III is arguably the cleanest looking designed smartphone of the year, but aside from its matte back finish, it looks identical to its predecessor, which means it's just as narrow and just as tall, but in all honesty, it kind of grows on you and makes you realize just how fat other phones have become. The only thing getting in the way of the Xperia's neat rear glass back finish is the camera module, which once again looks identical to the Mark II, but does have some worthy improvements, mainly within the zoom department, which has increased in terms of optical and digital depth and quality thanks to that variable telephoto lens, but unfortunately falls short of its competitors, not only in zooming functionality, but also the ability to generate consistent shots from a simple point-and-shoot perspective. That's not to say the camera system isn't capable, because it very much is. It's just a lot more capable in the hands of a professional photographer, with its basic camera UI taking a major back seat. However, the display is very much in the driving seat, thanks to its improved brightness, same great 4K 10-bit OLED display, and long overdue high 120Hz refresh rate, which translates to quality looking fluidity across the board. And while some games also take advantage of the display powered by the X1 display chip and flagship Snapdragon 888 processing chip, other games just can't handle the heat. Gaming software within Sony's latest flagship is no gimmick either, thanks to HS power control, 120 FPS screen recording, and of course, audio and video tuning. Speaking of software, Sony's take on Android 11 is very much stock-like, with great optimizations and welcome extra features. The Pro camera and video software is also littered with features, though it takes some getting used to if you aren't already familiar with DSLRs. The Sony Xperia 1 Mark III houses all the same flagship features found within other top-end flagship smartphones, and then some. I mean, are there any other phones in the world that have a 4K 120Hz display, variable telephoto lens, or 360-degree spatial audio? If your answer is no, then that's exactly why the Xperia 1 Mark III is so darn expensive. It truly is one of a kind.